Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell-Rhodes.
Hello, my superstars. This is Karen, and welcome to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. On today's show, we have a true, self-described, but true catalyst for transformation in the talent development space. And I am so honored to have on today's show Miss Elena, and I'm going to let her say her last name because I've murdered it 4 times already. So if you can say your last name, Elena.
It's Agaragimova.
Okay, so listeners, you see why I didn't even want to try and be disrespectful. But Elena is the founder of Shift and the author of 2 books, Shift and the Rough Guide to Awesome Leadership. So that doesn't pique your interest, I don't know what would. And she is also the host of 2 podcasts called Shift with Elena Agar and Confessions of a Career Coach. Now, Elena has had a ton of experience, and I was so eager to bring her onto the show because she has some interesting philosophies on how to kind of combine and think through your leadership actions along with psychological safety and wellness. And so these are some topics that we don't put together enough as we think about leadership, and I'm just thrilled to be having this kind of conversation with her today. So welcome to the show, Elena.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Oh, it's awesome to have you. Well, as you know, I can't wait to delve into our conversation today, but we always love to learn a little bit more about our guests before we jump into the nitty gritty. So for just as much as you feel comfortable, would you mind just giving us a sneak peek into your life outside of work?
Yeah, sure. So actually, the most recent thing, I actually just came back from New York because one of my things that I love doing outside of work is my podcasting life, which is, it's kind of, I guess it has some work pieces to it. But I was up in New York because I started to record in person some of my podcast episodes. So I'm 4 years in. And last year I said, I want to deliver better experience to my guests and my listeners, of course. And so I wanted to start recording in person. So that's been really interesting because, as you know, podcasts are so fun, and in person is great. Virtual, it offers a different perspective. So it's been a lot of fun. So I do a lot of that. I enjoy traveling, and just also this theme for this year for me is focus and build. And a lot of that focus has to do with just letting some things go. And learning that maybe I don't have to continuously run and hustle and do all these things that I have been doing through my 20s and my 30s. Yeah. And now in my late 30s, I said, maybe it's time to slow down. So I'm also doing a lot of slowing down outside of work.
Oh, I wish you could have tapped me on the shoulder when I was in my 30s to tell me to do the same, because I was like heads down. But I can empathize now because I'm kind of in that same phase of being a bit more intentional and focused on the core things that brings me and our company joy, the way we want to show up in the world of work. And so I love your vision for 2025. I can definitely relate. Well, thank you so much for sharing that tidbit about you. So if you don't mind, let's go ahead and jump into our conversation today. I'm not sure where you'd love to start, but at least let our audience know a little bit about your background at a very high level before we start talking about leadership concepts. So what were the areas in your professional career that you've tapped on to date, and where do you love to spend your time now?
So I started my career in higher education. So over the last 14 years, the first kind of quarter of my career or so has spent in higher education and the learning spaces. I've worked with undergraduates to master degree students to then executive MBAs, and that were already working professionals. So naturally, I was like, okay, well, what's next? Next is something within learning and corporations. So I went into learning and development at that stage because I was already working with that profile of individual, which is a working professional, right, in corporations. So it was kind of just a natural transition. And I've kind of developed into those roles. So I wore different hats as a trainer, facilitator, learning designer. I've had my own company prior to Shift. I've had a different company as well in 2019. with a business partner. And what we did was we basically serviced big corporations around performance and well-being in those
Nice.
organizations for their employees. And so through that, I wore a hat of a marketeer person and a salesperson and so on. So I kind of was, the chief learning officer, so to say, in the company at the time. And then after that, I also dipped into talent acquisition, because I feel like when you talk about talent development, it actually starts at talent acquisition. So I was able to
Absolutely.
kind of also lead on that. And I still spend a lot of time in talent acquisition today. And a big part where I spend my time is that mid-level manager. So
Mhm.
I do also some work with younger kind of early career professionals, but where I really enjoy the time is that mid-level career professional, is that on somebody who's on a cusp of becoming a manager, or somebody who's maybe been a manager but never had management or leadership training, and
Yeah.
kind of really helping them go to that next leadership level. And I work with leaders from all sorts of background, and I'm always continuously surprised, but also, and I don't know if surprise is the right word, but kind of just, it's interesting how we forget that leadership is not just about having done X, Y, and Z. It's a continuous evolving journey. And I see this across board. So that's where I kind of spend my time today.
Oh, I love that. And you know why I love you focus on kind of the middle managers is because they are some of the most critical leaders in an organization, but often overlooked because they have been celebrated for being great individual contributors and gotten up into management. But like you said, a lot of them don't have access or weren't given the right skill training or up-leveling their leadership knowledge to be very influential. And so they're trying to develop teams as well as trying to field and execute the direction of their leaders and bosses in the organization. And so they so need that help. So I just want to high five you on helping with them.
Yeah.
And I love, love, love that focus. I don't think you'll ever grow with a shortage of clients.
No, absolutely
Yeah.
not. And you know what else? An important thing you mentioned is that
Mm.
they're responsible for taking care of their people and then managing up. And also at the same time, they're responsible for taking care of themselves. That's the part that goes by the sideways. And that's the
Yeah,
most unproductive things managers can do. And we can talk more about that, because I think it impacts not only them, but also the leadership. And I think this is also what the senior leadership misses, is the very basic of what it takes to be a high performer.
it
And we just miss these basics. We spend a lot of money on all these expensive training and leadership training courses without covering the base of what it takes to actually be a high performer in general, in your career, in your life, and so on. So we can definitely talk about some of those things.
I agree. Well, let's jump into that since you brought that up. Why do you think, or what's going on in the workplace dynamics of why you, because we all, I mean, whatever research study you look at or whatever survey you see, we talk about the importance of, well-being, the workplace, and a focus on giving your people what they need to be successful. They've been talking about this for hundreds of years, and we still haven't really cracked the nut on this. So, in your opinion, where do you think the big miss is? Why don't our executives translate what we know to be needs of a workforce population to what in reality they offer support? Where's the gap?
Yeah, before we go into, just to set some context, let's just look at a couple of statistics. So
Sure.
today, managers, as of at least late like 2010, so like 2019 or so, according to Gartner, managers oversee 3 times as many people today as they did just a few years ago. And being a manager is a very stressful job, but then you're overseeing 3 times the amount of typically that you maybe when you started off in your career, right? 30% of employees also report that having bosses who are too stressed to help them. So this is according to some of the reports from LinkedIn recently, is that one of the things that the feedback that is employees give to their organizations, like my boss, like the comments they make is my boss is stressed, or my boss is not handling this well, and so on. So I think that's a big thing. And we've really seen this accelerate over the last few years. And we can talk about kind of some of the reasons of why that happens. And so I think there's just a lot of different changes that are happening. And part of it could be just because just the speed of business today, the speed of the rise in competition today, the speed of technological advances that we just can't keep up with, especially in certain industries, like tech. Like I'm in tech. I work with a lot of
Yeah,
software developers and so on, even healthcare tech, right? Like there's
right.
just so many developments that you have to stay on top of it. And if you're not staying on top of it, as an organization, you're going to be left behind. Yeah, I mean, we see this even happening in higher education. If you're not staying on top of the latest trends of what your customer needs, which is students in that case,
Yeah.
you're going to be left behind, which is, we see, I forget the numbers I left right now, but we have thousands of colleges closing
Yes.
every year
Yeah.
because nobody's going to those places, right?
Shifting
And so
desires of the college community.
exactly. So there's a lot of that happening. So I think all of that is just accelerating, and we're not, as human beings, like as employees, as leaders and organizations, we're not paying attention enough to that because we're so busy executing, and we're just trying to keep up versus pausing and actually working out a strategy that might work. There's a lot of talk about AI and how it's going to, either assist in creating or assist your current employees with kind of doing their jobs better or faster or easier. And then there's talks of things that they're going to replace and so on. But the reality is only 30% of organizations are actually doing anything with AI right now. So nobody's even paying attention to what's happening with AI and how it's going to impact the workforce. Right. And again, being in software development space, it was software developers were so hot and trendy 10, 20 years ago. Then we went, the hardcore coders, like that was the job to get. And then you go to today where it's like low code, no code platforms are coming out. So now like sometimes when I work with companies, you can easily train somebody who doesn't come from a tech background, who doesn't have a computer science degree, for them to use tech platforms where it's codes for them essentially.
Yep.
So
exactly.
And so imagine all of this happening and we're not paying attention. I think part of it is that, you asked the question around like, what is the gap? And I think the gap is just we're not paying attention generally. And part of it could be because we don't know what to pay attention to. Part of it could be that we're all just collectively on this survival going train without actually pausing.
Yeah.
And the final thing, I'll pause in a second, but the final thing I'll mention here is that I think for leadership, we expect that they have all the answers, like the senior leaders.
Yeah.
And we say, well, why aren't they paying attention? But who's paying attention to them as
That's
well?
right.
Like who's paying attention to them and saying, are you taking a moment, Mr. or Mrs. Senior Leader, Mr. CEO, you know what I mean? Miss CEO, like, are you taking a moment to understand what's happening with you first and foremost before you can be there for your managers and kind of the people that work with them. So
Yeah.
I'll pause here. So I think just to set context, I think there's just a lot of things that are happening that we're not paying enough attention to, or maybe we're paying attention to the wrong things, which is just trying to keep up versus just pausing and really trying to understand where we should focus on.
So I agree with you 150%. And I'll just give additional context. So yes, and one of the areas that our firm is really passionate about and has added it to our repertoire in the last few years is assisting advisory boards and board of directors of companies on how they should oversee and help govern their HR and talent agendas of the companies that they're responsible for. And it has just been a survey out that only 20% of organizations and companies have on their board of directors an HR subcommittee to kind of study some of what you mentioned. What are some of the trends that are going on in the organization and in the workplace, and how can they improve on those? And there's studies that came out from Wall Street and NASDAQ and a lot of others on corporate governance, saying that more and more organizations are going to need to have a deeper focus because they've realized that the leaders within the company, to your point, are really struggling themselves, what to focus on, how to facilitate change, because they didn't go to school to be HR pros or organizational effectiveness pros, but their actions are critical to the bottom line of these companies. So I definitely agree that who's looking out for the leaders who are charged or accountable with leading the organization when they themselves have some blind spots and gaps that they need to focus on.
Yeah. And to make it like super practical for your listeners as well, we can look at it from, if we just let's say we look at a manager side, then there's 3 things that we can do pretty fairly easily today. That's not going to cost anything in most cases, maybe a little bit of time from the person. So if you're a senior leader listening to this is how you can support your managers, right? And if you're a manager listening to this, I offer 3 kind of reflections for you as well. So number 1, the first one is really going back to that well-being piece. I literally just before this call, I got off the call with a senior person in Microsoft who's coming on my podcast. And so we were kind of chatting, and she has a very senior role in Microsoft. She's been there for many years. She's a wife. She has, I think, 2 kids. So she leads a very busy life. She's based in New York, so a very busy city and so on. So it's very easy to get distracted. And she said, one of the best things, she said, Elena, I've done recently is, of course, with the support of her husband, so God bless him, but she took 7 days over the holidays, like right before the holidays, right before, like in December sometime. She said she did a little retreat, 7 days where she just took a moment to disconnect. And she said, I came back so much stronger and ready to go and
I
full
can
of
bet.
energy and full of clarity and full of answers and so many things that not only made her a better, partner in life, but also a better leader and so on, right? And I
Right.
think you don't have to take it extreme. But I think just even if you're listening to this, you're like, Elena, this is ridiculous. I cannot take 7 days. This is not for everybody. Fairly so. I would
You
just
might take a long weekend, though. Maybe you
or
add a
like a
couple
long
of
weekend.
business days
But
onto the weekend.
Karen, like there's been studies that's been done that even if you take 10 minutes in the morning
Uh-huh.
of just quiet, it does so much. I'm not a scientist nor am I a doctor, but it does a lot of benefit to your brain and to how you react to things later on. It gives you clarity. Just 10 minutes in the beginning of the day, and maybe a couple of minutes during the day where you're just pausing everything, you're shutting everything down for just those maybe 5 minutes. Look out your window and don't do anything. Don't listen to anything. Don't think about anything else. Just look at the wall for all that matters. Like really, it's that insignificant, but it's that simple to do. And it has a lot of magic on our brain and how we then proceed with the rest of the day. So,
That's right.
I don't want to spend too much time, but well-being is number one. And as a manager, I would just look at auditing, how are you sleeping? What are you eating? What are you putting in your body? How much water are you drinking? Right. These are the basics of what it takes to be a high performer, which is how much sleep, if you're getting crappy sleep or not enough sleep and you're waking up groggy, that's not a natural state of mind. Nobody should be waking up unless you have small children or, elderly parents to take care of. You should be getting decent amount of sleep and you should be waking up refreshed, not reaching for a cup of coffee first thing. So that's number one, right? So just well-being, just audit your well-being overall and see where can you make small incremental changes, because that is the beginning of performance. That is the beginning of creativity and productivity and all those things. You cannot be at your best if the base of your well-being is missing. It just
Yes,
doesn't work. We're
I
still
love that.
human. We need certain things. So that's number one. Number two, reflecting on your management skills. So whether you are an experienced manager or had the management training, just really understanding that what people really care about today at work, and this was a Gallup report that recently also came out this last year, now I can say in 2024. And they asked a bunch of managers, like a couple thousand managers, and then 15,000 or so individual contributors that would report to those managers. And they asked them essentially, what is the most important thing that you want your manager to have? And the manager was kind of saying like, they should be likable and, friendly and supportive and high performer and so on. And the employees were actually saying like, it's great to have those things, but what actually influences performance of your team is, are you having productive conversations with them? Are you giving them constructive feedback? Are you giving them meaningful, impactful feedback? Are you spending more than ticking the box, having an annual or a mid-review, and you just like, spilling a bunch of, ticking the boxes items that you need to go through? Are you actually having a conversation with your employee? Are you actually giving them meaningful feedback on continuous basis, not twice a year when HR tells you to do that?
Right.
So I think even that small thing, just like asking yourself, when was the last time you had a one-on-one with your team member? Do you know what your team member, each of your team members values? Do you know what motivates them? Do you know what wakes them up in the morning excited to come to work? Do you know
Right.
how they feel about their job? Do you know if they know what's the future of their career in that company?
Right.
Right. So
Right.
I think these things is what people want. We want feedback, we want to grow, and we want to feel stability.
Yes.
And today, which takes me to my third point, communication. This is where senior leadership can really lend a hand to the managers, because managers are in this tough spot where they have to give all this information to their team members, but they don't always get that transparency from leadership either.
That's
Right.
true.
So I think having the right flow of communication and transparency in a company with all the changes that we're experiencing, we just discussed in the beginning of this conversation, right? With all the changes that's happening in the business world, with all the uncertainty and all those things, it's important to communicate on regular basis. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's twice a year, where the company is, where it's going. What does that mean for everybody in the company, from the junior, from the intern, all the way to the senior level person, right?
Right.
Because that is what adds to stress to employees. right? So I
Absolutely.
think, that's kind of where I see we can definitely do better. And it doesn't cost anything but time, really just a few minutes of time. Number one, audit your well-being as a manager, as a leader. Number two, ask yourself, how have you been as a manager? Like, have you really been an effective manager? Are you giving people what they want, or are you just ticking boxes for HR? And number three, communication and transparency. How are you making sure that your people, or if you're asking your leadership, to make sure that you have all the right information to be able to share with the team members, so that everybody feels a little bit more at ease in these changing times.
I love that. And on top of that is, some of the things I always coach leaders to do is, as much as possible, treat every member, especially direct reports of their team, as an individual of one. Because what motivates you, Elena, may not be the same thing that motivates me. But if you have, like you said, those deeper conversations, try to get to understand your staff a little bit better, then you will learn, what are those triggers that will help them feel more energized, focused, and engaged, as well as you'll learn how to best reward them when they're doing, fantastic. And all in the meantime, you're also deepening that know, like, trust factor that they have in you as their leader. You don't have to have answers to everything, but you do have to be empathetic, have a listening ear. And to your point, give them ongoing feedback, both positive and constructive, but constructive in a very tactful way, to let them know that you're, 100% their strategic supporter and empowering them to be their best. So I love what you have suggested for leaders to focus on, because like you said, it doesn't really cost anything but time, but you have to spend time anyway. So why don't you do it on the right topics and in the right way to make it very meaningful? Do you agree, or have a different
Yeah,
perspective?
no, absolutely. I think it's just you have to choose what pain you're willing to feel. So you either
True.
feel the pain of giving some of your time now, or you feel the pain, the financial pain, and then having
Mhm.
to replace people, or,
Yes.
whatever it may be, or, just spend a lot more time and money down the road. There's just no other options. There isn't. It's inevitable. You're either going to spend time, or you're going to spend time and money down the line. It's totally up to you.
Right. What do you think about what's your perspective on wellness programs within organizations? Do you think we've
Oh,
been
yeah.
gone down the right track, or is it some room to improve?
Listen, to be completely transparent, what I know working with corporates is that, and this might be a very candid
That's good. I love
statement, but
it. I love it.
we know. Well, let me say, it's my personal opinion that at the end of the day, and I think many people will agree, companies don't necessarily care about your well-being. I think leaders are too busy in their own world and with their own stuff to care about your well-being. But I think a smart leader and a smart organization understands that if you actually care, not care in the sense of, if you actually provide resources and support for your people to be at their best, at their well-being and those kind of things, if you provide them support, they will be better for your company. So even if you're a leader and saying, this is woo-woo stuff and it's all too wishy-washy for me, it's just a smart business decision to care about your people. And also to your point about wellness, I think being mindful of where you spend your money. A lot of companies are doing all this,
Yes.
they're giving Fitbits and yoga mats, and they're sending, and they're doing different things for spending a lot of money on different initiatives that actually employees don't care about. So the question,
Exactly. You took the words right out my mouth.
like the question, just ask, what do people actually care? What does well-being mean for them? And wellness and well-being are so interchangeably used, but we have to remember that well-being for employees is beyond the health and mindset, like the mental state. It's also financial well-being, it's social well-being, it's
Absolutely.
career well-being, it's having, it's under career well-being, meaning just feeling like stability in their career, feeling like they're progressing, feeling like they're growing, financial well-being, right? Making sure, like, am I, not having to worry, am I going to be laid off tomorrow?
Right.
Right. So the people, we need to feel financially secure in our lives. Social well-being in remote environments. Are we creating space for people to connect with their team members if you are in a remote setting? Right. How are you cultivating these relationships and creating these spaces, especially for the Gen Zs coming in, because they have a lot of challenges with building those relationships. And I mean, I can spend a whole
Yes.
hour, which I won't, on just the numbers of Gen Zs and the increase in loneliness
Yes.
younger
Yes.
professionals. So I think there's a lot of things we don't yet understand about well-being as a whole. I think it's used very broadly. And I think most companies are like, oh, it's a gym reimbursement. And the only thing I would say, the only tip I have is ask your audit, where do people actually spend your benefits? Who's using the benefits you're providing within well-being? And do they actually care about that stuff? And if they don't, and if you have a subscription model for something or some kind of reimbursement or some kind of, I don't know, support, but nobody uses it, ask yourself, is it A, because they don't know about it, or B, because they just don't want to use it?
Right.
Because that's just a waste of money. So
And get
whatever.
curious about what they do want, right?
Exactly. And ask them what they do want. So again, like understanding your each team member.
That's so right. Well, listeners, I mean, there was tons of nuggets in what Elena just shared, but at the end of the day, I think what she and I both would agree to walk away from is you have to take care of yourself as well. Don't be afraid to ask for what you desire or give feedback for what would be meaningful for you to help your own overall wellness and all the levels of wellness, physical, mental, emotional, you name it, right? And just at the end of the day, make sure you're taking care of yourself, because if you're not doing that, you're definitely not going to be able to lead at the top of your game. Fortunately, we're rounding out on time today, but we cannot let Elena sneak away without asking her our signature question. And for my new listeners out there, you may not know, but our company commissioned a research study on high-performing leaders, and out of that research came multiple buckets that were key segments for success for high-performing leaders. And we always ask our guests which of the 7 that we write about that came out of our research, and all 7 are equally as important, but which one really popped for them. And Elena was so nice to share that leading with courageous agility really resonated with her. And for my newbies out there, courageous agility is all about having the courage and the fortitude to go ahead and take calculated risk, not just crazy risk, but calculated risk, and still stand up for your belief in and still move forward, even if the future is uncertain or unclear. It's all about having that courage to, even when you're not 100% certain, done your research, you've come to some reasonable conclusions, and you still take those baby steps forward so that progress is made. So, Elena, curious minds want to know why courageous agility really resonated with you.
Well, it resonated because something I often say is that the kind of 3 C's, which is courage, curiosity, and consistency. And I think these 3 I try to apply in my work and kind of just in my general career in life. And it's something that keeps pumping up in just every theme of my life, essentially, and every season of my life as well. And I think, courageous, because we need to be courageous, right? Like, because the future is coming, and
Whether we
and we
like it or
just,
not, it's coming,
whether we
right?
like it, being courageous enough to make a change if you need to stay agile. And I think curiosity, just being curious about what's next, will actually, asking yourself, like, what's next, and what I don't, we don't know what we don't know. So what is it that I don't know today that I'm going to look back at and be like, I wish I would have known that. So who can I talk to? Like, being curious, who can I talk to? Who can I learn from? Listening to things that I don't normally listen to, exposing myself to environments and people that I don't normally hang out in, right? Like, getting away from the algorithm, essentially, right? That's like
Right.
flooded in my LinkedIn or my YouTube and my podcasting platforms. And then the last one is consistency, because I think that no matter what you're doing, without consistency, nothing works. So, and I think by staying consistent is kind of where ultimately success begin or continues, because whether you're trying to get in shape, whether you're trying to get healthier, whether you're trying to grow in your career, whether you're trying to grow your podcast or your business, it's consistency that matters. And most people don't stick to things long enough to see the fruits of their labor, I guess, come out. So,
Yeah.
so that's why, I say, like, courage, curiosity, and consistency, and all of that is very much aligned with courageous agility.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Elena. We're going to have tons of information in our show notes about you, your bio, links to your website and social media platforms. But I always love to give our guests airtime to let our listeners know as well where to find them. So if anyone's more curious about you or your company, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is the best place. That's where I hang out the most.
All
So
right.
I love LinkedIn.
Wonderful. I do too. And that's going to definitely be the first link you all need to tap into in the show notes to find her, because as I mentioned, her last name is a little bit unusual to spell, and I don't want you to miss out on finding her. So definitely check those out. Well, thank you so much, Elena, for your gift of time today. It has been absolutely fabulous. I was sitting here feverishly taking notes on my little notepad here to share with my team. So thank you again for coming aboard on the episode today.
Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you to listeners for the gift of your time as well. As I always share, we know that you have literally millions of other podcasts you could be listening to, and we do not take your patronage lightly. All that we ask is that you like and subscribe to your favorite podcast platform of choice and share our podcast with just one friend, because by doing so, we all will better be able to lead at the top of our games. Thanks so much, and see you next week. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.